All right, everybody, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Thanks for coming out this week to our lunchtime discovery presentation. I'm your host. My name is Chris, and I'm curator for the Daily Planet Theater. It's my job to just get up on stage and welcome everyone and introduce our guest speakers, and to let you know that this program is brought to you by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education and the Museum of Natural Sciences. Many thanks to the folks in both of those organizations who help us put on a great show for you every week, Wednesday at noon, for the Lunchtime Discovery Series, which you can also go online and see many of the past presentations over the last several months. There's a great archive of stuff. You can learn something new just about every day if you went and checked out the live stream archive for this program. See us after the show if you're interested in more information about that. Today, we have with us Sharon Meade. She's with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission from the Outer Banks Wildlife Education Center for Wildlife Education. I think I got it close. Close enough. And we're going to talk about conservation, I think, but in a way that many people today might not think about it, with hunt clubs, right? People who are out in nature often want to protect and preserve it, and it's done and been done many different ways over the many years. So let's learn something new, get some history with our Science and Nature with Sharon Meade.
Thank you. All right, guys, I'll try to figure out walking and talking. So, as you can see, hunt clubs. If you're familiar with Currituck at all, and we're going to go over that map, it's not a very wide body of water. It's about 19 to 24 miles long, depending on which boundary line you want to go. Now it's the bridge, of course, the Wright Brothers Bridge, going across and bisecting the island and the mainland. But before that happened, as you can see, we have this map, and we'll take a look at it later on. That's a lot of hunt clubs in a 19-mile stretch that in certain places might be only a mile wide, and in others it might be 5. But the question is, how did this happen? This, of course, is where I keep my boat, by the way. I boat to work every day. I go old school, I like to think. I live on the mainland. This is the dock at Water Lily. You can see the remnants here because it was also once a commercial dock and was used mightily, as were many places up and down the Sound, because that was the way you traveled then. So, right out, in fact, whoop, there we go, if I get it. That was also, there we go. This spot right out here was when they actually used to farm carp as well. That's another story. So, let's take a look. When you come to our center, our theme in our exhibit gallery is Life by Water's Rhythm, because that's what changed Currituck Sound. And of course, if you live on the water, which many people in our state do, it dictates how you live now as far as storms and access for pleasure and recreation. But back then, it was how you lived. As you can see right up there at the top of the map, we have the old inlets, Currituck, New Currituck, Mosquito, Caffeys, as you come on down. What happened, of course, we had the Roanoke River back flood at a point in time, and when it did, it built that sound, and of course, the outside shoal there became the bank. And we had this stretch of water that ran, as you see at the top, down toward, see if we can get this to point, right here is where the Wright Memorial Bridge is now. So we had Albemarle down, and you could go all the way out. It was all salt. Now, by 1828, give or take, all of those inlets started filling in. Now, we think of filling in like we see nowadays. You get some trucks, you push some sand back down there, and you fill that space up. Inlets came and went, all up and down the outside bank there, and so it wasn't closed completely. You still had eddies. The storm still opened them all up, which we'll find out later how one of the clubs started. But by 1828, it does close, and nature starts changing its course from, of course, a salt water body to a fresh or maybe brackish, which, of course, a little salt, which we still have now at Currituck Sound. And it changes how you have the flow into the water, whether it comes in from the rivers or all the way from Oregon Inlet up. Currituck Sound is not a lunar tide body of water either. It's a wind-driven tide. So northeast wind pushes it out, southwest pushes it back in. Some days I don't go to work because my boat's on the bottom because all the water has blown out. However, this is what started this. Wild celery or eelgrass started to be the predominant submerged aquatic in Currituck Sound. At that point in time, as you can see, Currituck was never a wealthy county at all, but it was good for farming. It had good soil for growing melons at the south end of the county, of course, sweet potatoes, soybeans, corn, but it also had access by water. So at the turn of the century, you had the means to get things to market. And this, again, is going to play a part in our market hunting. Or you could be a turtle farmer. Terrapin soup at the time. That was over on the bank. Life was not easy. Like I say, it was a very poor county. It was a very old county. The Bell Farm still exists. I always like this picture because I think Mr. Bell was more proud of his horses than maybe the family. As you can see, he's brought them predominantly into the picture. This is a little later on, but this is Courthouse Road. If any of you are familiar with Currituck, this is where you come down and get on the ferry now. We had our courthouse, and I'll tell you a little story about that monument as well. So, more and more waterfowl are starting to come, because what has happened now that sound has become fresh and all that grass, Jim Dean, our beloved writer over at Wildlife Magazine, used to call it a salad bowl of grasses. But it was also good for fishing. So, at the time, we have no ferry. The water is very shallow in Currituck Sound. So to work, you just put a little barge and hooked your mule up, and we had long piers that took things out. So we're after the war. Life is hard. You could work all week for just $1. Then the ducks and waterfowl, the geese, started coming through Currituck Sound because when you looked at the flyway, it was the perfect stopping point midway of their trip south. So here it was. It was fresh, it was full of food, and it was a good place to rest. You're halfway down, it's time for a break. Currituck Sound suddenly became this mecca for waterfowling. They estimate that somewhere between 1 to 1.5 million birds were coming through Currituck Sound at this time. Again, 20-mile patch, that's a lot of waterfowl. So, about that time, Currituck duck was become a delicacy. Again, Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and of course, we had gentleman hunters, and then we had market hunters. The irony of this as well is that it was very vogue to have Currituck duck on your table at some of these finer houses and in restaurants. And in essence, if you kind of boil it all down, it was a food craze, just like now. It was avocado toast, but it's the same premise. It was because of how the sound had changed and that grass that grew that flavored the meat of these ducks. And again, it is terribly excessive. I will not argue that point with you. After the war, till almost the turn of the century, market hunting flourished. They did start to notice there was a bit of a problem. They were really the naturalists of their day. We didn't have a whole lot of science to back up what was happening. So they did develop some game commissions and things of that nature. And also, the northern robber barons, as they called them at the time, and we already knew they had some clubs up in Long Island, and they had heard about this tremendous ducking down in the South. So they come down and they start to take a look. So we had all these different types of clubs come about, and again, we'll take a quick look. We have the corporate, that's the largest, and we'll talk about some of those. That would be like Currituck Club and Swan Island. Very large. You had elected officials, you had a secretary and a treasurer. These clubs could be anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 at the time, at turn of the century money. So we didn't have a bunch of Southern gentlemen in there putting these clubs together. You had a local superintendent. Most of these clubs had an average of 1,500 to 2,000 acres of land from sound to sea. And of course, you had to have somebody take care of it. Somebody had to feed you, go get your stores, actually transport you. You could have the partnership, again, one or two exclusives. You could have those together. And these were usually a little clubhouse for certain people to just their own personal needs. They weren't going to have a bunch of club members come in. This is just going to be maybe one or two and their friends. Single ownership. Whalehead Club always comes to mind when we think about that, and we'll go over that one, of course. Whalehead is not particularly a hunt club. It was a private residence, and if you've never been, come down and see us. It's well worth the walk to go through that house. There it is. It's very splendid, and I have a lot of stories to tell you about it. You also had the little tiny clubs, just one man, sporting lodges. This was, like I say, a bunch of farmers would get together. Piney Island Club right now is one that still operates. It's new, but you could also have them open to the public so that you could drink your wine and be served the best food in the world, or you could have a roasted duck, plain as everything that everybody else ate here. When we get looking at things after we have our talk, I'll show you some of the some of the things they were consuming and how they ate it. So here we go. This was our average. There he is. That was Mr. Jones. That's where I docked my boat. And he took one or two people hunting. And then sometimes you might get someone like Mr. Joseph Palmer Knapp to go with you, and you were a one-man operation. So this is the picture on the lower left is the Currituck Dock. That's a duck hunter getting ready to go out. That boat is full of decoys, which we all now wish we could have, because we'll talk about the value of decoys. This was down Poplar, let's see here. There it is, down toward Poplar Branch. That's a whole truckload of decoys, because when you were market hunting, you needed at least 300 to 500. Again, somebody had to make these for you, and somebody had to build a boat for you to go out in. So we also had that group of guys. We still have these groups of guys in Currituck that have a little club together, and they usually buy a little piece of marsh or farmland, swan hunting or goose hunting, and we still have those as well in Currituck. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Swan Island Club. These were gentlemen from Pennsylvania. They were sailing down. They also had a club in Long Island. So they're sailing down. They get in one of our famous storms, and the only thing to do is go inward, and they were lucky because they came in at New Inlet. New Inlet closed in 1828, and as I talked about before, nature does what nature wants to do. So it wasn't like it slammed shut and never opened again. So there was, during storms, you would get eddies and flows through there, and they went in on their yacht, the Anananya, and ran it aground. And the next morning, of course, the waters had receded and they were grounded inside the sound at this point in time. So they go and they meet the gentleman who, at the island at the time was called Crow Island. He allows them for the next 7 years to come down and hunt his marshes, and they use the Anananya for their clubhouse. Of course, unfortunately, it burned to the ground in 1877. Well, come on now. Well, fellas, what do you think? Oh, okay. And this is the drawing of it. You can see along the top line there, that's all decoys. There were about 100 decoys in that boat. There are some still left today. If you're familiar with decoys, you know that they are worth a lot of money. So they stayed for 7 years. It burnt to the ground. They decided to buy it. And then they built their first clubhouse. Whoop. Oh, there it is. This is one from 1816. Very nice edifice, as you can see. You had all your guides' houses behind and clubs. Again, somebody had to build that house for you. Someone had to build that boat to get you out there. Someone had to take your clothes in, build your decoys. So we're talking about something that's going to come about as we keep looking at all of these clubs. Most all of the clubs at some point in time have burned to the ground at least twice. Well, and it's cold. You're over there on the water, you know, it's cold and it's damp, and you're built of a house that's, strictly wood. So almost every hunt club that we look at today has burned at least once. This is a later shot. As you can see, it was a little colder then. There's our chunks of ice out there in front of the club. This is another shot. This is later on. They had to break the ice, you can see, to get in there, but that was fine birding weather. You can see that they also have a cupola up here on top of Swan Island, and they had also 2 huge ship's lights so that if you were out in the marsh, they could light those at night or when you were coming in or it fogged in and find your way back in. They did not spare themselves anything. However, of the standards of the day, this was extremely rustic living. As you can see, this board is still there. It's in Latin, and of course, as it reads, as you can see, this place shines for me above all others. We also understand, too, that when you were, doggone this wealthy, you had strictures of society at that time as well. You had to dress for dinner. You had to act a certain way. You had to watch your language. It was a far cry to come here to Currituck from Boston or Philadelphia or New York. You could relax. I guess you could fall down drunk if you wanted to. No one was going to see you. You were here, and the strictures of society you left behind. And when you did come down, we talk about the difficulty of getting here. It could be a 3-week trip just to get here. You had to take a train. Closest you could come in Currituck was Snowden. If any of y'all are familiar, that's kind of like Sligo. That's more toward the Virginia side. And then you had to take a boat. That was long and short of it. You had to take a boat. So when you came, you would plan to stay for 2 to 3 weeks, or maybe a month, or maybe the whole gunning season, because it did take you some time to get there. And you can see, this is pretty rudimentary. I mean, it's all you need, a place to put your clothes, a place to sleep, because someone took your wet gear for you every day. Someone dried your boots for you every day, came and got you up, got you breakfast, put you in the boat, took you out to the blind, got you set up, picked up your ducks for you, loaded your gun for you. You did all right. But again, someone had to take these jobs. And who better than people in Currituck? Because they knew They knew the nature of the sound. They knew they knew when teal were coming. They hunted long enough. They knew where the best grass beds were. They knew where dangerous spots were. So again, nature played an important part because with the change of the water, they had grown up and through it, so they had that intimate knowledge. This is a rare, pretty current shot. If you go now, Swan Island has been sold again. It had some very wealthy patrons at the time. And of course, just before the last group sold out, Mr. Bob Timberlake was a member there. And I have something today, if I can tip it up for you just a little bit. I have a special friend in the audience today, Miss Nancy Farmer, whose husband had collected this gun, and I'll show it to you briefly, and then I hope you'll come up and see it before you go today. It is a double-barrel shotgun. If you look down here on the stock, it says, I'm trying to read this, it's upside down, y'all. I'm like, okay, ECY, it looks like an R. And Swan Island Club, engraved in the stock. We don't get guns. It's hard to get them and be able to authenticate them at all in any way as being associated with these clubs. We're lucky enough that Mr. White did not want to use a gun. They kept guns there for their guests, and I find most marksmen are this way. They want their gun, and so their gun is, it's what he did. He made sure that everybody knew it was his gun. It's very deeply engraved and branded, but I was so thrilled to get this. Yeah, I can't tell y'all because we just do not get these kind of things that often. If you come out to the Wildlife Center, we have a fine collection of things, but this one I'm just tickled to say we now have. New Inlet Club. Okay, we're talking about that. Sound has closed, and it's New Inlet, and then we had New Old Inlet, and so the Whites had lived there since probably that land grant started in 1674. So we have people that have had this land for a very long stretch of time, and it's in the family. Well, the inlet closes, and they probably still own quite a few acres, probably 1,000 acres of marsh. But across the inlet, Swan Island. On the south side of the inlet, the Whites and the New Inlet Club. I would not doubt that there's probably still some litigation going on to this day because clubs thought they owned the marsh. And in some cases they did. The larger clubs employed marsh guards. It was to the point, all right, I've got my 1,000, you've got your 1,000, and then you have your local hunters coming through. They're hunting for game and they're living. Hunt clubs propagated their properties. They blocked off all the little ponds in their marshes. We have one of the last original marsh gates from Currituck Club right there. That's a copy of the sign, but they printed them on cloth. They actually put little cabins in the marsh, and if you came near it, well, bad things instigated. Unfortunately, we did have a death due to marsh guards and clubs. And the saddest part on this was you employ local people, and then local people were hunting. So needless to say, it was a love-hate. It's interesting that sometimes nothing ever changes when you get a different economic base in one small space. So Mr. Pud White, we've moved over to Knott's Island. He's a fine example of the small club owner. His wife cooked. You know you got good food. You know you did. I mean, if they got the wives to cook, I'm sure it was some really fine food. It's probably plain food, but I'm sure it was quite good. The Whites still live there, and Mr. White, the current Mr. White, is also an excellent decoy carver. This is really interesting when we get over to Knott's Island and Mackey's Island. Thomas Dixon, the author of The Klansman, which they made Birth of a Nation, owned property in Currituck County. He had a log cabin they're pretty sure, on this property and probably where he wrote, which is just very ironic to think about it. Most people didn't give it much thought. They didn't know a whole lot. I mean, you didn't know anything about too many books because they were hard to get in Currituck. That was one other advantage that hunt clubs brought, because they brought in resources that you couldn't find in Currituck. Comes to mind sheet music, and we're going to talk about a couple other things too. Let me look at my time here. Okay. So he's on a boat one day out of Currituck going to Baltimore, and Joseph Palmer Knapp is on that boat. If you don't know who Joseph Palmer Knapp is, Mr. Knapp would probably be happy about that, because he never wanted any credit. We all know the Institute of Government here. He lived right across the Sound from my grandmother. My grandmother was one of his teachers that he brought in. So I'm getting ahead of the story. So real quick, it's 1916. He's come down because he's a man's man in all aspects. He was a scratch golfer. He played tennis. He fly fished. He duck hunted. Very much a hugely well-rounded man. So he comes to Currituck, and he had a bad day hunting. Oh no. So he's back on the steamer, and he's fussing and complaining. He runs into Thomas Dixon. Well, Nat was a publisher, so he knew Dixon, and Dixon's like, oh no, come with me. So they go back to Knott's Island, and he takes him hunting. This is 1916. By 1919, he has bought Mackey Island and built his 37-room lodge right here. You can see it. And this is all called Oak Point. He had a 9-hole golf course, boat houses, everything. The yard had a swimming pool, or cement pond almost. It was quite beautiful, and it was quite, the gardens were done in a colonial manner, very beautiful. However, Mr. Knapp would see the children out on dirt roads and wondered why they weren't in school. And he was a huge proponent of education, and he was appalled. So not only, well, come back here. Did he, come on, there he is. Well, he built our schools. He built the teacherages to house the teachers. He brought the teachers in. He started a home economics for ladies. He did huge things to make this county better, and he's buried in Currituck. He championed the game hunter over big clubs. He didn't know a whole lot about livestock. I will tell you a little quick story because I got so much to tell you. Some of the farmers in the area, of course, came and helped him, and he wanted to start like he was very interested in propagation, because that was what they'd gotten all the livestock and birds back in Europe after the war. Unfortunately, on his first foray into cattle, he bought, they purportedly said 30 cows and unfortunately 30 bulls, which he found out that you only need one bull. They said you could hear it all over the island, because the boys just fought constantly. So he learned pretty quickly about that. He was so beloved by people in Knott's Island, and sent children to school, paid for hospital bills, loaned people money. But he was very interested in how you keep ducks around. We have one of his first publications. What he did was brought some people down from Minnesota and wanted to know how could we grow duck food to get the ducks to stay. Well, they came down, they did the whole survey, and he got the whole report, we still have it, and thought, okay, his idea was, because things were coming in, we're in the Depression, we can teach farmers to raise ducks. Why not? So they laughed, of course, they jeered, but he started making these little pamphlets. He and another group of men started More Game Birds of America. So in the 30s, they're having them printed. Of course, he's a printer, so no problem. He's gotten that done. At some point, when that got so big, and of course, Mr. Knapp did not want anything too much associated with his name, that organization became Ducks Unlimited, which is now the largest waterfowl conservation group in the country. As long as his name wasn't on anything and anybody bothered him, I think he'd be proud. He made such a difference in Currituck. My grandmother, like I say, is one of those teachers. She came in from McVinville, Tennessee, to teach at 20 years old. And I think she thought he was second only to God. All right, let's move on here. Monkey Island Club. This was owned by the Penns, railroad people. It was originally a Pamunkey Indian site. There were also burial grounds there. They came over and, of course, fished in the summer and hunted in the winter, and then they went back across because they knew living on the ocean was perilous, something that perhaps we didn't take the same view of. The Penns owned it. In fact, you can see right here, there is there it is, railroad bell. If it got too bad there, you could usually take a sled and walk across the ice and back over to the islands. The history here is, because this is so old, the first time it was sold, it was for $15. It was 10 acres of land. As it went on and through the different changes in owners, of course, it ended up in the hands of Fish and Wildlife. The old buildings are still there. It is now considered an IBA, an important birding area. It is still, I think our last count, over 400 nests. It's colonial wading birds. So you got your egrets and herons out there. Interestingly enough, because of the proximity to the bank and our marshes, snakes can get there quite easily. It's an easy paddle. You can kayak right over. When snakes get over there, of course, if they climb trying to get those chicks and those eggs, those wading birds, shucks, they'll pick them right off and eat them. Well, cottonmouths, of course, don't climb as well, and we call them short stubbies. So they go over and they're going to get the spoils, whatever chick or egg falls. So when you go to Monkey Island, and does tell you do not go, I always tell everybody this, and it is not an exaggeration. There is an inordinate amount of cottonmouth moccasins over there because, again, nature has made this place where it can go and safely get fed. And like I say, I don't have to climb up the tree. I'll stay down here. But all the other ones that do. So when you go, get some boots on. When we go count, we get some boots on. We took our state herpetologist over there once, and I've never seen a happier person. Okay, here we go. That's Monkey Island from an aerial shot. Unfortunately, it's down to less than probably 3 acres now. Used to look like a giant bat out there overhead. But like I say, the remnants of the building are still there, and the birds are still there. And you can see the little dots in the background. There are still quite a few duck blinds out there. Hunting's still quite carried on quite well in the sound still. Numbers of birds aren't there, but go back. Monkey Island, like all others, had marsh guards, and they Monkey Island everything. And there was your poster that, yes, indeedy, you would be convicted and you'd be a $50 fine to be caught on their property or out in their marshes. So again, even the smaller clubs, they were jealously guarding what they considered all of theirs. This was Mr. Roland Twyford. He was caretaker there. You lived on that little island. Kind of a lonely existence, actually. Pine Island Club. This was owned by Mr. Josephus Baum. He owned thousands and thousands of acres over at Pine Island. They were from Boston. And again, they came over and bought, I believe it was just shy of 2,000 acres, and built Pine Island Club. It was first called Palmer's Island, and if you go there now, the Palmer's Island Racket Club is right next door. But they also practice this propagation that you could raise ducks in the incubator, you could plant your marsh, and you would have more ducks. I don't know, it sounds a bit obsessive, doesn't it? But think about, they thought of ways to keep what they thought was theirs, and then, like Mr. Knapp thought, a way to help everybody by making more ducks. We have just finished conserving this. We have it at our exhibit gallery now. It is the incubator from the Pine Island Club. It came from Santa Cruz, California. The address on the bottom is written in wax crayon, and it says Santa Cruz, California. And it says Kinston, North Carolina, to L. Baum, Poplar Branch. That's the only address. How simple life was then, that it could actually come all the way from California here by 3 names written on the bottom. It's interesting. We still have the original instructions, and all I can tell you after reading them is I would be no good at propagating eggs. It's very complicated. Okay, let's see. The Lighthouse Club, we're moving south on the beach now. This is their barn. We don't have a really good picture of their clubhouse. We talk about them because they were also a very large club, over 2,000 acres. But what brings them into difference here is Edward Collins Knight bought that land. Now, they were in sugar and Pullman cars. They were Philadelphia and Newport. He had been a member and liked to hunt. This is a picture, this is probably a little later. This is probably in the 30s. We have some pictures of them building it, but what he did, he bought it out. Now, second wife, Amanda LaBelle. She liked to hunt. We have 2 different stories here. One, she liked to hunt, and one that the Lighthouse Club was a little too racy to have ladies, or wives. They might have had ladies, but they didn't have wives. So, okay, we come down. So he buys it. He dredges out what we now know as the boat basin here. Oh, come here. We can get it done. Oh, right there. And there's the boathouse in the back. When they had it, it had a little island in the center. It was known as Corolla Island. And, of course, if you look now, gosh, that's a lot of land left. And he had put Chippendale design bridges across. The whole house was done in cork. It was quiet. It resisted water. It's over 20,000 square foot building, 383 Depression dollars to build. Rooms in there were torn down from other homes and brought there and reassembled. Ironically, Tiffany had a homewares department, per se, back in the day. It was expensive, but it wasn't as expensive as we would know it now. So every fixture in this house, including hinges and doorknobs, are Tiffany. It's amazing to see. They only would come down 3 months out of the year, by the way. Again, you didn't have to dress for dinner if you didn't want to. There were, some people have said, there weren't these roaring 20s parties because my husband's family all grew up there. The nights were very good to people. Again, someone had to take care of every need you had. And this house took over 60 people to keep running when they were in residence. He was also interested in keeping up his marshes, and so you got people who built you the best boat, made you the best decoys, and knew the land the best. Amanda, by the way, when we talk about not having the strictures of society, my Nana said that she wore pants. Well, I guess back then it wasn't quite as proper, but she wore pants, and of course she was purported to also carry a tie-down pistol on her hip. So and was known for shooting at things. Other stories say things like she would walk on those corks and tear them up with heels and then make them put them back or make them move piles of sand. But again, this did give people jobs. So it's a colorful story, whether it be true or not, but the truth of it was that everybody in the whole village got something for Christmas every year. And it's usually something they could use. Aha, here we go. Here's the Mac Daddy, Currituck Club. This one was the first one ever started. Again, New Yorkers. 1857. Surprisingly, the whole house survived the war. Some of the interior things were sold on the courthouse steps. We know this, but all in all, it survived. They were very stringent about their marshes. They kept marsh guards. They tried to even give the rights out for fishing on the beach. We have some lawsuits over that, though, that even in the day, because they were sturgeon fishing, that they would enter willingly. By the way, every one of these big clubs had their own attorney. When we start looking at laws, gotta hurry. They made a lot of changes to laws in Currituck County that got changed back and forth. There is the Currituck Club yacht. Now, it was nice to have your yacht, but you couldn't travel the Sound like you could if you were in one of these. And I'll talk to you about that real quick. Hang on. Oh, there's Mr. Sam. They had a rule book everybody had to follow. They had their own separate liquor lockers. And again, each room, interestingly enough, being very aware of fire, had a rope ladder, and I don't know what they call them exactly. They were little glass, they were fire extinguisher balls, and they were filled with like a bicarbonate, and every room had some of those, and I thought, well, okie dokie, throw the ball, jump out the window. But unfortunately, the club, of course, like all these others, burned before, and then we lost it for good in the third fire. And they have sold that property, and the club itself doesn't exist in any way anymore. So, what they did, somebody had to be a gamekeeper. Somebody had to feed you. Mostly, somebody had to make decoys and keep up with your tallies and shipping. Again, these boats and wharfs came about. That's Mr. Havermeyer at the Currituck Club. And again, people had good jobs. In essence, Currituck Club and all the large clubs like that created a whole cottage industry in Currituck. Someone had to build a barrel all the way back to game hunting to pack it. Somebody had to run that boat. Someone had to be a shipper or a carrier. This is how you lived if you were a marsh guard. I'm sure it was very chilly. This is the second one. This is what it looked like inside. Nothing but quilts and little tiny. We have what we call a summer girl stove there at the center. It's barely 18 inches high. But then again, if you had a fire, you could only jump overboard, and it was lots colder then, and there was nobody you could call. We have these still. They were printed on linen, and then they were posted, and that's what they used to put around all the property. As you can see, anyway, forbidden. This is Bell's Island Club. This is over on the mainland, and this is one of our older clubs. This property originally was owned by a Tory. But again, we have Currituck's very old. Interestingly enough, over here on Knott's Island, John Corey was U.S. Steel. When he and Mr. Knapp were over there, they had taken out the locks at Great Bridge. For over 10 years, they had no locks, and Mr. Knapp did not like what it was doing to his sound. This would never happen today, of course, but he implored them to put them back. Of course, we were coming into the war years, and they said they couldn't afford it. So he told him, I'll loan you the money. He said, I can't get the steel. So he goes down the road, like less than a mile. There's John Corey, his neighbor. John Corey gets in the steel, he pays for it, they put the locks back. Whew, I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it sure expedited, let's put it that way. Can't imagine. Unfortunately, by the way, Mr. Corey was very good to local people. He let kids use that whole camp in summer. Unfortunately, he also agreed, he didn't mind anybody doing bombing practice too close. Some people got real upset. Well, Norfolk's right down the beach, and unfortunately they strafed her one night, caught on fire, and burned his club down. He had a very large watchtower there too. That survived, by the way. Let's see here. Flyway Club was Ogden Reed. He was the publisher, as you can see, the New York Herald. That is still there, and now is a beautiful, beautiful wedding venue. Dews Island Club, or Jews Carter, is still there. That was started, it has a very long history, because again, Currituck's an old county. The Chapman and Haynes owned it. It is now owned by a conglomerate and is back behind the Cotton Gin, if you ever wondered. It's back there on the Sound. This is right down the street from my house. Unfortunately, they just finished tearing it down. This was one of those small, single lodge, one man, wife cooked, took care of you at the Wild Game Inn. Now, here we go. What this all did. Guides were storied in Currituck County from the very time that they did their market hunting. Innovation. The box you see there. We had lay-down boxes. Mr. Pat O'Neill, who was also a very celebrated boat builder. We had Wallace O'Neill, very celebrated boat builder. Came up with these ideas. That's a sit-up box where you put it down and you sit, and once you duck down, you're in basically a stationary blind that is anchored by iron ducks. Also, almost everybody made decoys in Currituck County. Decoys now, if any of you all collect them, if you have granddads in the garage, bring them in the house. They have become a huge market and very collectible and very expensive. Currituck birds are a different breed. If you go look at northern birds, they weren't a worker. Our birds were workers. They look like workers. They're heavy, but they're still very distinctive. Mr. Ned Burgess, James Best, of course, he was Kitty Hawk, the Dudley brothers. Birds nowadays can go upwards of $50,000 and more. Tackle too, and guns, guys. Save everything in the garage. I guess that's my best advice to you. Okay, let's see. Somebody had to make barrels. We had barrel making right there on the Currituck Canal, which you know now is where the Coinjack Bridge goes over. We had an infinite source at Dismal Swamp, so they were bringing the juniper in. Mr. Ned Burgess, his birds are highly prized. He didn't start carving until he was 80 years old. He was part of the canal crowd there, and you could order, they were 50 cents. Or $1. I need a time machine, y'all. But so if you busted a head, you just went in and went down and told him, carve me out 5 heads tonight, and we'll go fix them all. And they put them back. So we've had guides, we've had decoy makers, as you can see, production, decoys. You had boat builders, gas boat. Now, that's something we'll take a look when we get done here. Tunnel drives. Nobody knew what a tunnel drive was. Think about a jet ski where you have propulsion that goes up through it. It's right here. Jet skis push right here. Tunnel drive boats. So you had that recessed hull and your blade there, and so you could go and your prop, and it didn't draw water. It was a gas boat, mind you. It had a car engine in it, and it was a little cumbersome, but you could go in shallow water. You could also tow your decoy skiff, especially if you were a market hunter. Remember, you had to carry out 300 to 500 birds. It was perilous. I mean, think about it. We didn't have fancy life-saving gear or life preservers. It was what you knew about that sound and when to go. So we have our guides, we have our boat builders. We had places up and down Currituck Sound. So, Poplar Branch Landing, these places are all no longer there. Guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hurry you through. Currituck, guide services. All up and down the sound. And we didn't get a chance too much because there's just so much information, and I apologize for that, but the laws changed according to hunting regulations, went back and forth. It also started game commissions in Currituck County, which was one of the very first ones in the state. Mr. Knapp helped develop game warden programs and, of course, instituted government to teach them, and started our whole education system in Currituck. So if you come today, come see me, come have a look. Currituck Sound is still a beautiful place. This is Poplar Branch now. You saw that picture before. And this is what I see some afternoons if I'm lucky, if I'm heading home. And this is what I see in the morning when I'm going over. Still beautiful, still storied, and home. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So if you've got questions, let me bring you a microphone because I want everyone in the room to hear.
I heard that the first North Carolinian that was ever invited to join any of these clubs was Frank Keenan, like in the 1940s. Is that true, or do you know who
I
the first?
do not know for sure. We have a lot of the logbooks. It's interesting, like Currituck Club, at first, even if you died, your relative had to be approved. You couldn't even get in, and you couldn't even pass it down. I find that a little excessive. And then after that, they did change their laws slightly to the point that if you died, your heirs at least could join. But they were still charging like $75,000 to $100,000 a seat, but it was that, I guess, coveted at the time. It's hard to imagine now. But then again, like Nana said, you think about the Knights building that kind of house, and if it had been someone from outer space, they wouldn't have been any more closely watched than just the opulence of some of these homes, and the different ways of life. And yet, strong friendships were enjoined, as well as fierce feuds. So just normal, but yeah, property and like I say, the sound, and people are still that way. I mean, people that live there are very protective of it, and covetous at sometimes as well, about building on it or water quality.
Go for it.
Is there a map or somewhere you can find those clubs that are still in existence and those that you could visit?
None of them are public anymore. Most of them, Swan Island is still there. Last I'd heard, Nature Conservancy had it, but I believe it's gone again. Now, you can boat by them. Of course, Whalehead is open to the public and is now a museum. Pine Island Club, I forgot to mention that, through the course of different owners, and Mr. Earl Slick owned it last, gave it over to Audubon. So now it's fantastic. You can go and walk those trails. You can go to the house, is still standing, and they are in the process of turning it into an education center. You can go back in the house. It's like ooh, like walking through time. It's fantastic. But the land there is some of the finest maritime woods you'll ever see. Unfortunately, Currituck Club, when it burned, that's all been developed now. That was some wonderful, wonderful maritime woods. You can see the remnants of Monkey Island if you paddle out and around, not go aboard. Swan Island, of course, I said, still standing. Dews Island, privately owned. And if you didn't know it was behind the cotton gin, you'd never find it unless you went by water. Piney Island Club's up on the Coinjock Cut. That's a new club. But other than that, you just have to come see me at the center. I've got lots and lots of pictures and things from these clubs, which we're just more than pleased to have, to save that part of history in Currituck. Oh, everybody's written books, and we have plenty of them. And Miss Farmer, by the way, y'all have donated over 30 books to us now, so you can come over. I'll bring them out. You can have a seat at the table, stay all day. Stay all day and read.
I've got one.
Yes.
How did you get interested in this history and in telling these stories?
Member of the Currituck Wildlife Guild for over 20 years, and my mother's people are from Currituck proper. My dad's people are from East Lake, and they were Creefs and Alexanders. They were shadboat builders. That's our state vote, in fact. We lived up just across the state line for most of my childhood, but you were there constantly. And then decoys, well, they were just something sitting in the garage at Granddaddy's and tackle and things like that. But then when I moved back down after college and working in marriage, and moved back down, and my husband's family are Austins from Kerala, like, golly, 4 generations back. So wasn't hard. It was all around you. And then at some point, it was the love affair with the decoy. And then when WRC came and was going to build the Coastal Education Center, we were lucky enough for them to come to the Guild and ask us, if we build an exhibit gallery, will you come? And so now we're lucky enough that not only are we offering the science classes and, like I say, citizen science classes, we have a really award-winning movie that we show, and a really amazing, small but amazing history of Currituck in the cultural and natural world, and it's hunting and fishing. By the way, when nature changed one more time, the sound became full of milfoil, and a little later on, we became the bass capital of the world. So we went from ducks to bass. Jim Deans talks about catching over 156 bass in 2 days. And we also were, which, come see this movie, we've got it, it's pretty funny. They held the Bassmasters Classic when they were all still wearing white jumpsuits and had big mutton chop sideburns. Pretty fun to watch. But so it's, again, the sound the rhythm has changed again. And the milfoil went away. It stayed for the longest time. When we were kids, it was horrible. You couldn't get up to certain islands because it was so thick. But so again, nature changed again. The milfoil's gone away. You can catch bass at the north end of Currituck Sound, but it's salty enough you can catch flounder at the south end. So it's changing all the time, and mostly we just want to keep it clean and keep it preserved and keep enjoying it. It's a wonderful place.
Let's give Sharon one more round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. And everybody, take this opportunity, come up, meet Sharon, but also see some of the amazing artifacts that she's brought.
Good stuff
to see. And thanks for coming out to the Lunchtime Discovery Series today. We'll be back here next Wednesday at noon. Bye, everybody.